Right? So what is human capital? Well, it's all the skills that people have. Okay, the skills they have, and these can be used to produce. So you can think of them. Typically, you think of them probably as market skills. So that'll be something that makes you like really good at work, really productive in your work. For example, you know how to use some statistical program that you use as a financial analyst, for example. But it also could be non-market skills, like you're a really good cook. You can whip up like a really nice dinner in about an hour or something like that. Or you might be really knowledgeable about fishing, or yeah, anything, a whole bunch of things. So those are non-market, um, and then it might not be specific uh, non-market in the sense that you're producing a tangible product, but it could be something that you enjoy doing. So, for example, you really um, have built up and are really good at some sport, and you go and do it on the weekends for fun. Okay, so in that case, you're not really producing a product that we can consider like a non-market product the way you would maybe dinner, but you're making yourself happy. Okay, so and those are all different kinds of human capital. So we can kind of divide it into one side, those that are useful in the market, and those that give us other kinds of gains, but aren't necessarily useful in the market, although sometimes they can be useful in both sides. So examples: learning to read and write, that's human capital. Use how to use a computer, how to drive a car, public speaking. All these are things that involve human capital. And so we kind of think of it the way we do about physical capital. We think of that you acquire them through investments. So you, for example, you do education. So going to school, you're going to increase your human capital. At least that's the theory. But there's other ways to acquire them as well. So for example, you do on-the-job training, you get experience. So on-the-job training is specifically being trained um, to do a certain job. So some jobs will have like a training period where you're sort of like an intern, or you're an apprentice, as such things. And also could just be general work experience. So the longer you work, the more things you learn, the more situations you've encountered, and you kind of build skills over time. Also, it could be self-study. This is becoming more and more common. So, for example, it's fairly popular to try to learn a language, for example, through self-study, where somebody doesn't actually go to school, but they study on their own to improve their skills in this area. Um, and then there's some kind of skills which are definitely human capital, but they're a little bit harder to find, like soft skills. And these often are thought to have come from home. So how you navigate social situations, for example, even maybe like manners in how do you behave in a professional situation. This kind of training starts at home. So we're exposed to these kind of ideas from our parents, and they kind of guide us in this, at least the beginning part of developing these kind of soft skills. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to connect human capital to understand the wage gap. So one of the basic idea is one explanation for the wage gap, and again, this is not the whole explanation, but one explanation could be that there might be differences here. So one group might have more education than another, or they might have different type of education. So education which is maybe more focused on, for example, more focused on market production. Or one group might have more experience, or there might be something more intangible that is helping them to earn more. Okay, so that's the idea that we're going to come to. Now, one thing I want to differentiate before we move on between physical capital and human capital. So there's some key differences between these two. So unlike physical capital, human capital is owned by the worker, not the firm. This seems kind of so what? But it actually matters. So what matters is because when you're the worker who have human capital, when you decide to leave, you take whatever human capital you have with you. Okay, so it doesn't stay in the firm; it belongs to you and stays with you. Um, so that means it's mobile, right? So again, human capital moves with the worker. You need a worker in order to get the human capital that they have. Um, and so this is one thing that firms sometimes are a little bit reluctant to invest in workers if they believe that they might leave, because of the fact that human capital is mobile. It's difficult to sell or trade. So instead, we can think of it, instead of selling or trading it, we can think of it as we're renting it. Okay, so it would be great for if you have like an advanced degree. It would be great if you could just sell it to somebody, sell it to the market, but actually you have to give your time to earn money from your human capital. You have to be willing to give your time. Okay, and so that's kind of a difference. Whereas if you did own a machine or a building, you could just you could just sell it or rent it to a firm, and you could sit back and collect the payments. But when it's your actual human capital, you have to go to work, right? So this it uses the worker's time to do this. Okay, a couple more things. It's more influenced by non-monetary concerns. So, for example, a company is not going to invest, well, for the most part, is not going to invest in a new building because they think it's shiny and they like it, or because it makes them feel good, right? For the most part, they're going to invest in a new building because they think it's going to make more profit for their firm. Human capital is quite different. So there's a lot of non-monetary reasons somebody would invest in more human capital. So for example, somebody might spend a whole lot of time learning all about their favorite hobby. But they don't ever plan to be a professional. So if any of you have ever spent a lot of time on a sport or music or cooking or some other hobby that you have, but you never thought you would become a professional and earn your income from that. You just did it because you liked it, right? Then that's a non-monetary concern. So you got a whole bunch of human capital in some area, but you did not get it to make more money. You got it because it made you happy. Okay, and this is a little different. Physical capital, typically firms are not investing in physical capital because it makes them happy. They're investing in physical capital because it makes more money. So we can kind of separate that. Certain types of human capital investment seem very focused on money, and others seem more focused on being happy. Language learning is another one. It may be useful in the job market, but also often people do it because they like it and it makes their life more interesting. Okay. A final one is it's harder to finance. Okay, because we have a lack of collateral. So we do have in the U.S., for example, there are programs to get student loans, but most of these programs are guaranteed by the government, and that enables the lenders to be willing to lend to people for their education. If they were not guaranteed by the government, it would actually be fairly hard to get a student loan. And the reason why is because there's no collateral. So there's nothing they can take away from you if you don't pay back your loan. And so whenever there's no collateral, it makes it a little bit harder for the banks to agree to loan the money. So anyways, in developing countries or countries that don't have this student loan system, that can be an issue and can lead to an inefficient amount of education and human capital. Another thing to note, for lower levels of education, there is not tend to be student loan schemes. And so if, for example, if somebody's very, very bright but very low income and their local public school is not very good, generally some bank is not going to loan them money so they can go to a high-performing private school, or so they can move to a neighborhood that has good public schools, for example. And so there is some financial constraint on people's ability to invest in the efficient amount of human capital. Some things that has in common with physical capital is human capital depreciates, so it loses value over time. So for example, skills become rusty. You have to keep constantly reinvesting in them. And some skills become rusty faster than others. For example, if you've ever had the experience of learning a language and then you don't use the language for a couple of years, it generally becomes extremely rusty. Where other skills don't become as rusty. So for example, reading. Once you've learned how to read, you pretty much know how to read. And even if you don't read much for several months, when you come back and read, you're not going to usually won't find it difficult. Okay, so some skills become rusty faster, other skills become rusty less fast. And finally, some skills will become obsolete. So you could learn something and then that thing is no longer useful. It's no longer useful in the job market. Something like this might be you learn how to program in a computer language that's no longer used in the market. Okay, or an old example you became a really good typist on a typewriter, and now typewriters are no longer used. So some part of that skill is still useful because you can type on a computer, but the details of your skill may be kind of useless because typing on a computer is not the same as typing on a typewriter used to be. Okay, in the next one we're going to talk about the relationship between human capital and wage.